All right. Good morning, everyone. Shout out to all the troopers who made it out early in the morning today. We're talking about one of the most important topics, I think, in crypto today, which is scalability. We're looking also at specifically L1 versus L2 scalability, but I think we'll go wherever the conversation takes us. So we've got three awesome people on stage today. We've got Nikola from Aeternity, we've got Marek from celo, and then we've got Anurag from Avail. Why don't we just start from the top with some intros, what you're working on, maybe some thoughts on scalability to kick us off, and we'll go from there.
So my name is Nikola Stoyanov. I'm the chairman of the Eternity Foundation, and I picked that up, I think, about 9 months ago in order to focus on reviving an L1 and preparing it for what is to come, and probably also for what we're going to talk about today.
Hey guys, I'm Marek Olszewski. I'm one of the co-founders of celo. Celo is an EVM-compatible L1 today that's transitioning to become an L2 tomorrow. So I think this topic is definitely near and dear to our heart. And if you're new to celo, we're, again, an EVM chain really focused on real-world use cases. There's a lot of stablecoin activity happening on celo, a lot of payment activity, a lot of savings activity, hedging against inflation, but also more recently, micro-lending and just lending against future income. All of the things that you'd expect from kind of a chain focused on really providing utility for people, like the kind of, that mirrors the banking industry, but fully on-chain.
Hi, my name is Anurag. I'm co-founder of Avail, previously also founded Polygon. Avail, actually was started within Polygon back in 2020. We spun it out last year. Avail really, is infrastructure for what we call the modular future of blockchains. Essentially, the initial thinking for blockchains was that we can scale on one blockchain, like layer one blockchains, but what we think is, the entirety of transactions on blockchains can't exist on one blockchain, and so you really need this multi-chain future. And so we build, Avail is this infrastructure which consists of this layer one that supports roll-ups on top, really, and does scalability, interoperability, and all that stuff. So yeah, happy to get into more details later on.
Awesome. And I'm Joe from Alchemy, Web3 developer platform. We got a lot of great perspectives up here. I'm really excited to see kind of the different takes on scalability. Cool. Well, why don't we start with the basics? I'm curious to hear from each of you guys. What do you think are the main challenges around scalability today, and what are you personally excited about working on?
There are multiple things that I'm excited about working on, but right now I think the most interesting thing is, and we had this discussion a little bit earlier with Marek, was that we have been working at the Eternity Foundation on something which is called hyperchains. And on hyperchains, you would be able to create scalable and secure sidechains, which you would then be able to underline with, for example, Bitcoin, to make sure that they're absolutely tamper-proof, and you would be able to utilize the infrastructure of Bitcoin, and then on top of that, you would be able to play with the so-called child chain with anything you would really like to. So you would combine the proof-of-work consensus with the proof-of-stake consensus, which might actually be one of the things that I'm most excited about. And the other thing that I must actually admit was what I spoke with Anurag's co-founder a couple of days ago when it comes to what Avail is doing right now with modelizing different components of the blockchain. This also sounds really cool, to be honest.
Cool. Yeah, I think on our end, obviously, the upcoming transition to the L2 is obviously all-consuming and something that we're really, really excited about, working really hard on. It's no easy feat to turn a decentralized running L1 that has on the order of 700,000 daily active users, billions of dollars of value being transferred every month, to safely and securely and without incident transition that into an L2, and so that's definitely taking a lot of our time. But it's going well. We already launched a testnet a few months ago at ECC, and we're looking to transition another one of our testnets end of this month, and then hopefully mainnet by the end of the year. Beyond that, I think I'm very excited about, a lot of the work that's happening in the broader Ethereum ecosystem around interop. I think interop is going to be the next really big, I would say, bucket of work that the whole ecosystem is working on. I think you've probably heard a lot about also solving the UX issue for users who are on multiple L2s. I think all of this feeds into interop, and so that's definitely a big bucket that I'm super excited about.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think maybe I'll try to put it in a more Web 2 sort of analogy. So we are looking at scaling these public blockchains. If you look at how apps on the internet have kind of evolved over time, right? You don't have all the world's apps on the internet live on one single supercomputer, right? They are on separate servers. They're scaled independently based on demand. And the L1, the layer 1 blockchain situation is something of this supercomputer sort of analogy.
Yeah.
I like to say it like that, right? If you look at 2014 when Ethereum came in and all the iterations after that, I like to look at them at attempts at better versions of Ethereum. So if it's like a Phantom, BSC, Solana, all of these are attempts at better versions of Ethereum. But the reality is that all the world's apps cannot fit on one single big supercomputer. And so you have to get into that serverification mode. And based on what we've studied, the industry has iterated on, the roll-up construct on Ethereum or like Avail, for example, is the closest analogy to what we have as servers in the Web 2 and the traditional tech, right? Roll-ups are really these verifiable servers. Can we do some compute outside and then provide some input back to the base layer that helps in verification, for example. And that's how you kind of scale. And the beauty of this architecture is that rollups don't need to be EVM, SVM, they can be anything. We are seeing rollup stacks like Stacker, for example, that are, you can write programs in JavaScript, in TypeScript, in Python, for example. So I think what I'm trying to say is that on a meta level, this layer 2 debate is really the serverification of blockchains, right? How can we get to an architecture that allows us to scale based on demand, rather than scale your supercomputer or your server cluster, for example, right? So I am excited about this, and this has already been there for now 3 to 4 years. It really began in 2019, 2018 when rollups were starting to get discussed. And now things have started to kind of reach the next level. We already have hundreds of chains as rollups. And so the things what we are excited about is, I think the technology is sort of there in place. I think what we are more interested in is how can we kind of, instead of, we've been this kind of situation where we build these very nice systems and we expect users to come over, on-ramp, jump over hoops. And I think the next stage, in which you can already see with something like TON, is that you're taking the blockchain technology to users rather than expecting them to come here. And I think that is going to accelerate with this whole layer 2 sort of thing, where we will be able to embed blockchain technology into user workflows, into distribution flows, rather than the inverse.
I think that's really well said. And I think one theme that I heard from all of you guys is really rollups, L2s. Obviously, it's a big part of the Ethereum roadmap and how we think about scaling today. Marek, I'm curious to dig in a little bit with you. So Celo, you guys started as an L1, but then decided to transition to an L2. How did you think about the trade-offs of that?
Yeah, great question. I mean, for us, I think it was more of an ideological decision. We started in Ethereum. We started building an easy-to-use wallet on top of Ethereum. And when we realized we couldn't get it to scale, we couldn't get it to have the experience that we needed to target those normies that we just talked about, we ended up working on our own alt L1, EVM-compatible L1. And that was what you did back then. This was 2018, 2019. The scaling roadmap didn't exist. Now that it does exist, I think it's very hard to be in the Ethereum ecosystem and have an EVM chain that is not an L2, right? I think for anybody who is working on or running an EVM-compatible L1, I would sincerely recommend just taking a deep look at the project and thinking about whether or not it makes sense to migrate to an L2. I think ultimately developers building on these EVM chains will want it. I think from an interop perspective, given all the really exciting things happening in Ethereum on interop, it's just going to be a big win. I think ultimately what I'm seeing is a lot of these other EVM compatible L1s are really taking a close look at kind of following Celo and doing the same. And I think ultimately that's good news for Ethereum. I think the future is certainly bright for Ethereum becoming the settlement layer of Web3.
Yeah. So very focused on Ethereum there. Nikola, curious to hear your perspective because Ethereum and EVM compatibility is not as much of a focus for you guys.
Listen, I like building L1s. This is how I've started off with, and this is something that I feel incredibly comfortable with, and I believe that it is a vital part of the Web3 ecosystem. The beauty of layer ones is that you do have heavy infrastructure. So it is really a base layer, but it also comes with its own issues, obviously. So there's a trade-off. On one side, I am able to provide technology as a baseline, which people can build up on in order to allow different scaling opportunities. If, like you said, Anurag, if those are ZK or optimistic rollups that are now popping in, or if this is with you as an L2, but you still need an underlying technology to provide that stability and security. Like, we just mined our, I think, millionth block we have never been down, there has never been any issues, and that is, in my opinion, something that gives you track record and history. So with having that base layer, I'm absolutely for this, call it maybe symbiosis between layer ones and layer twos, because having that base layer and building on top of it with an L2, that now gives you the opportunity to take care and really solve the issues that you have with L1s. Because honestly speaking, an L1 is not built to be infinitely scalable. Because Ethereum was a perfect example for that. You had the congestion, you had the issues, you had the hacks, etc. pp. But with the L2s that are popping up now, those things are resolving those things. But they can still go back to that layer one kind of deep, stable part and make sure that they can rely on it, and that secures also their chain at the end of the day. On the other hand, if your L1 somehow has an issue, that automatically then translates also to the L2. So there's, again, a trade-off into it. But this is why, for me, it's vital that those things coexist. And for me, it's incredibly important to make sure that you have different L1s to be able to cater to different use cases, because I think you mentioned that earlier, Anurag, that there's not one chain to rule them all. 7 rings in the Lord of Rings should be more chains than one to do everything else.
But do they need to be L1s? Could they all be L2s?
Well, why? You can't run everything on one L1.
Of course you can.
Why? You still, like with Ethereum, we saw that there are the same issues that Ethereum created or came out of Ethereum, they kind of translated also into the L2s. You still have Solidity, which is a shit programming language. I'm sorry. You still have hacks.
Most used language.
True.
JavaScript
most hacked language. So it's that trade-off that I'm talking about. So Ethereum was that front runner. Everybody used Ethereum because it's the first smart contract language out there, right? It was the first blockchain alternative to Bitcoin that became, let's say, somewhat prominent, right? But I still think that there should be other chains to support each other and to work. That's why I believe that interoperability between L1s is going to be an incredibly vital part of how this continues.
Do you mind if I respond?
Yeah, no.
Go ahead.
This is
fun.
This is very much. This is fun discussion.
We can't all have the same opinion, right?
No, I think
this is really lovely, and I think actually my response might dovetail nicely to what you're thinking on the topic of can you have infinite L2s scaling up to one L1? The answer is absolutely, right? Because at the end of the day, the main bottleneck is data availability, and as Avail and others have shown, you can scale data availability horizontally, and so the end state will certainly be a single L1 that can scale data availability. Whether or not every chain will roll up to that, I think remains to be seen, but certainly it's not a technological issue. And then the question, of course, is which chain will be the one that everyone's rolling up, and obviously Ethereum is in the pole position, and certainly one that we're really excited about at Celo.
So I think when we discuss this layer 1, layer 2 thing, sometimes we get a little bit tribalistic in general, but the idea is that if you kind of divide the functions of a layer 1 and layer 2, especially in a very modular construct, is that there are two parts to building a blockchain. One is the actual execution part, which is innovation on the VM, whether it is the EVM, SVM, Move VM, JavaScript VMs, you take it. The other is the more difficult to pull off thing, which is the crypto economic security bootstrapping part. Every time you kind of come up with a new layer on blockchain, you have to go through that cycle. You have to bootstrap a set of validators, you have to bootstrap a token, you have to ensure that a token has value. So it's a lot of work doing that over and over again for new layer 1 blockchains. And that happens every single time. And so really, when we kind of talk about this layer 2, we need to also talk about how can we, the layer 2 thing explicitly doesn't need to do this crypto economic bootstrapping thing. If you look at Base from Coinbase, what Base did is they took the OP stack code and deployed as a rollup on Ethereum, and they didn't have to do all this bootstrapping of validators or even a new token, for example. They focused on what they wanted to, which is user acquisition, user adoption, that sort of thing. And you will see that happening more and more, right? So this crypto economic security bootstrapping, which is the more slower part, right? The token takes time. You need time to build up this crypto economic security. That's why you have all these crypto economic security as a service sort of projects like EigenLayer, like Symbiotic popping up, because that is the really hard problem of bootstrapping a new layer 1 blockchain. It takes years to, Ethereum has been there for 10 years. That's how it kind of got to this stage in terms of security. And it's very hard. You can look at the Cosmos set of L1 chains to see what kind of crypto economic security they've sustained over the years. It's very hard. And so that is the foundational, lens which you should also view layer 2s. The innovation that you can bring to this space is that it's not of course the EVM is dominant, but you don't need to stick to the EVM. You can do whatever innovations you want. You have now Solana VM rollups coming, we have Move VM rollups coming, so all that sort of innovation still stays, even in a layer 2 kind of a thing, but you kind of solve this from a more scalable. Of course, it brings in this fragmentation issue of how do you connect all of these together, but that's also there in a layer 1. If you have 100 layer 1s, they still need to interoperate, right? There's still an interoperability problem. But if you are on this shared base layer, it's much easier to interoperate, right? So it's much more nuanced than we like to think.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so, rollups obviously kind of seems like where the industry is going. One question of mine, though, is what are some of the challenges that you guys see with rollups? I think a lot of advantages, like you mentioned, bootstrapping the security on the L1, the shared kind of, the shared ecosystem, shared developers, but what are some of the challenges that you guys think are there?
Marek, go ahead.
For me, the biggest challenge certainly is around wallet abstraction and just interop, right? I think we've basically proven horizontal scalability now of chains, which is great. So that means that we can effectively scale Ethereum infinitely. That's quite lovely. But now everyone's saying, okay, but suddenly my experience is a lot worse. I have accounts in multiple chains. I need to have wallets that can make sense of that. I think long term, what we really want is we want what people are calling full chain composability. This ability for a smart contract on one chain, on one L2, to be able to interact, literally do a function call synchronously, not async, into another function on another L2. That is the holy grail. I mean, once you do that, you basically solve the scalability trilemma. And what's exciting is that it's actually feasible, I would say, for the first time now. There is a proposed solution for this problem that everyone really thinks is going to work. And that solution relies on ZK EVMs and what people are calling real-time proving. So this ability to prove your transaction within the time span of an Ethereum block, so say less than 12 seconds, ideally somewhere around 4 seconds. If you can do this, then you can actually prove the validity of your transaction with respect to the latest state on Ethereum. And once you can prove that, then you can atomically execute another transaction on another chain as part of that first transaction. And that effectively allows you then to create function calls that are synchronous between two L2s. And so, we have ZK EVMs today. Some of the best ZK EVMs are able to prove transactions on the order of 15 seconds with that kind of latency. And so we're actually not that far away from being able to get to that 4-second time period where we'll be able to actually prove these things in real time. And there's a lot of work, of course, to get these ZK EVMs to be battle tested and secure. And then even more work to create standards around how all of this interop is happening in the broader Ethereum ecosystem, especially because there's multiple ZK VM implementations out there. But I think ultimately, we're in a position now where we can actually solve, really the scalability trilemma, which is just really, really freaking exciting.
Yeah, I mean, see, as the modular roadmap for Ethereum has improved, right? Like, I mean, in general, we also sometimes forget that Ethereum was born at a time when the only way to build blockchains was very monolithic. So it began life as a monolithic blockchain. Then slowly over the years, it has been, kind of on this upgrade path. And now because Ethereum is it holds a lot of value on production, it's of course necessarily slow to upgrade in general. And so some of these things will come soon, some of these come later, for example, but the path to the end goal is becoming more and more clear. And that's why, like blockchains like Avail, for example, were started to fulfill that need in general. Some of the challenges that we see are, like things like fragmentation, for example, right? Like there's hundreds of chains, no way for these to interoperate. And it's not necessarily that there's these 100 chains they need to interoperate. It's also actually looking at developer problems. Like something like an Avail, for example, is deployed on probably 12 or 14 chains. It's the same exact protocol deployed on these multiple chains. They have to maintain these deployments on these multiple chains because they don't want to lose out on users on all these chains. How can we get to a position where you deploy a protocol on one chain and it is accessible to users across these chains? Like, those are the questions, those are the challenges that we have to answer, right? Like, I mean, in general, like, sometimes we get into a lot of low-level features, but, how do they translate to the end developer, end user in general? How do, like, all the wallets that we see today are very power user UX oriented, right? Like, I mean, you have to, like each of them, you have to switch chains. Of course, this is changing pretty soon, but we need like more, better wallets built from the ground up, for example. Like from developer point of view, right? Like, I mean, so we started building like this Polygon POS chain back in the day, then we moved to ZK EVM. But if you kind of think of it, the developer interface is still the same. It's still the EVM. Like, there's no real difference in terms of, we can bring more compute power, bigger blocks, etc. But how can we make it easy for the average traditional Web2 developer to come to this space? How can we enable writing these programs in, let's say, TypeScript or Python or JavaScript, but still be able to access these same security guarantees? So, I mean, I think we do a lot of thinking on, like infrastructure and how one infrastructure will interact with this, but we as an industry, we have to kind of think more and more about how the developer experience can improve, how the user experience can improve, and more importantly, how can we kind of take this technology and put it into the user workflows, to distribution workflows. I mean, I would argue that is the only reason why the TON ecosystem, something like the TON ecosystem is being, like becoming very popular, is that there is this clutch of users. Like I don't know if you guys remember, there was a time in 2019, 2020 when Facebook was coming up with Libra, and a lot of the industry, like people were, kind of threatened, so to speak, in general, right? Like, I mean, the reason is Facebook has 2 billion users. I mean, if you bring programmable ledgers to that kind of audience, like it's game over for a lot of projects, for example, right? Like, so we have to be very clear that this technology, people will not come to this industry because it's decentralized. It's, people don't buy into privacy tools because, like it's a very niche audience. You have to go to what the user wants. You have to kind of build those distribution flows. So those are some of the challenges that I see.
You got to build for the real world.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll give you the perfect example. When we started building Eternity, we opted to use Erlang as a programming language. So Erlang is object-oriented program language, which is incredibly complicated. There's like 3.5 people in the world, averaging the age of 60, that actually were working for Sony Ericsson that used this language. The beauty about Erlang was that it's literally made for transacting information in a very, very secure, stable, and very fast and efficient way. But then we got to the problem that I think you both guys addressed quite well, that how do you actually get this to the masses when it's so complicated to use this? And then we get to, in my opinion, also, I think both of you guys mentioned this, the 2 biggest issues that we have is number 1 is interoperability. How can we all work together in order to cater to more people? And the second thing is the user experience in itself. Because if it is more complicated than something I'm used to, it's such a high barrier of entry that I'll opt for something else. It's just that simple. And lowering those barriers is probably the biggest challenge that I see.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because everything else was mentioned already.
Yeah.
Marek and Anurag.
I think well said on all those things. And we've got time for just one more question for you guys. So looking 5 years out, what does the world look like in terms of scalability? Does it kind of look like today with rollups? We've made some ZK improvements, kind of solved things. Are there radically new architectures? Like, what does that look like? And we'll have to take this one fast.
I'll go first on that one. I honestly think that layer 2s are going to become like the main user focus, the main point of access for users. L1s are still going to be there, going to be effective. They're going to make sure that, again, the baseline is secured, the infrastructure is stable. But besides that, because building layer 1 and just advancing layer 1 takes so much more time, rather than just using all the advantages of a layer 2, you're going to have like those bricks and blocks are just going to move on. So you're going to have an L1 is going to create something new, and then L2s are going to jump on it, and they're going to advance way faster. So it's going to be a brick by brick building part, which in my opinion is still going to hopefully get us closer to that nice and easy UX that I mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, I touched upon this before. I mean, for me, the future looks like thousands and thousands of L2s rolling up to Ethereum with full chain composability. So all of these L2s will be able to call smart contracts across chains, basically have one smart contract be able to call a function in another smart contract running on another chain. And we'll have all of that working with real-time ZK proving and some really elegant transaction bundling happening by block builders. So yeah, and I think in effect we'll have solved the scaling trilemma at that point.
See, I think at their heart, blockchains are these secure, programmable ledgers, essentially. And like the world runs on ledgers. Every workflow in that in the world is either like a social ledger transaction or an economic ledger transaction. And so, essentially, in 5 years, I would say that like blockchains make their way into real world workflows. Like they kind of supplement or replace the ledger interactions that happen, right? Like everything in the real world is a ledger transaction. Your banking is a ledger, your social media thing is a ledger, your shipping is a ledger, everything is a ledger. Now these ledgers are run by siloed participants. The public blockchain rails are really these credibly neutral rails that you allow these coordination. So how do we kind of make these people easy for people to plug into these ledgers? Right? Like those are the real questions. In 5 years, I think we'll be able to kind of abstract a lot of this, get rid of this tribalistic mentality, and like bring this technology to real users. That's what I'm looking forward to.
We don't have to wait 5 years. It's happening already.
Yeah, of course.
Absolutely. Well, that's time. Thank you so much, guys. Anurag, Marek, Nikola, thanks for sharing your insights, and thanks for joining us today.